If Chuck Berry had never existed, rock and roll wouldn't be what we know today. And no, I'm not exaggerating. This guy didn't just play the guitar like no one else. He completely changed the rules of the game. Today, we're diving into his story, one full of music, rebellion, mistakes, success, and moments that defined the sound of an entire generation. Because yes, Chuck Berry wasn't just a pioneer. He was the one who built the road. So if you're a fan of real rock and of those legends who changed everything, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Let's get started. Chuck Berry wasn't born a star, but he was born with rhythm in his veins. His real name was Charles Edward Anderson Berry, and he came into the world on the 18th of October, 1926, in St. Louis, Missouri, a city with a musical soul, a crossroads of genres ranging from raw blues to traditional country. His family was hardworking and middle class. His mother was a teacher, his father a deacon and contractor, serious people with strong values. But from a young age, Chuck had one priority: music. At home, everything played swing, boogie-woogie, blues, gospel. And instead of sitting still and listening, he picked up a guitar and started playing. Even as a teenager, he showed a special connection with rhythm, melody, that intangible something that makes your foot start tapping without you even noticing. But not everything in his life was harmony. Chuck also had a rebellious, restless, impulsive side. And that mix, the gifted musician with an untamed spirit, would shape his entire path. At school, his personality already stood out, and at church, he sang in the choir another key piece of his foundation. Because even though he's remembered for electric solos and onstage showmanship, his musical roots run far deeper than they might seem. What's fascinating is that without knowing it, Chuck was absorbing everything he would later blend into an explosive cocktail. The structure of country, the rawness of blues, the rhythm of boogie, and the passion of gospel. All of it would come together to shape a style that didn't exist yet, but would soon shake the world. And yes, at that moment, no one knew it yet. But rock and roll was about to be born, and it already had a name. But of course, not everything in Chuck's life was music and harmony. Because when he was 18, he messed up big time. On a trip to Kansas City with two friends, they decided to rob some stores in a car. And to make things worse, they used a gun they'd found lying around. The result? He was arrested and sentenced for armed robbery. 10 years in prison, though he ended up serving just 3 in a juvenile reformatory. Sounds like a disaster, right? But ironically, that's where Chuck Berry started to see things clearly. Within those cold walls, music became his refuge, his drive to get out and do something different with his life. He began to truly picture himself living off his passion. When he finally regained his freedom, he came back to a harsh reality. Having a record didn't exactly help when it came to finding a job. But Chuck didn't sit still. He did it all: janitor, hairdresser, photographer, carpenter, whatever came up, just to support his family and keep moving forward. And while he was doing whatever he could, music kept pulsing strongly inside him. He never let it go. At night, he'd play at parties, bars, wherever he could. Because yes, he needed money, but he also needed to express himself. The interesting part is that even though it looked like he'd left his rebellious days behind, that spark was still alive. Only now, he was starting to channel it into something much more powerful, into his lyrics, his style, his way of playing. And without anyone noticing yet, that rebellion turned into music was shaping something new, something that would break all the rules, something that would sound like nothing that came before. Chuck was being reborn, but this time as an artist hungry for the stage. In 1953, music really started opening doors for him. Chuck joined a local group called the Sir John Trio. led by pianist Johnny Johnson. At first, they only called him in to replace another musician, but the moment he stepped on stage, no one could get him off. Chuck had something different. It wasn't just how he played, it was his attitude, his energy, the way he made you feel what he was feeling. He started blending all those styles he'd soaked up since he was a kid. Southern blues, the rhythm of country, neighborhood swing, even the playfulness of gospel. And from that mix came a completely new sound. Something fresh, vibrant, something no one had heard before. Thanks to his charisma, the group started getting noticed. So much so that they ended up changing their name to the Chuck Berry Combo. There was no question anymore about who was stealing the spotlight. And here comes one of those moments that define a career. In 1955, Chuck traveled to Chicago, the heart of the blues scene, and met none other than Muddy Waters, a living legend. Muddy was impressed and told him, "You need to talk to Leonard Chess, the owner of Chess Records." Chuck brought Leonard a recording, and it was love at first listen. Chess heard the demos and said, "This needs to be recorded right now."
Maybellene, why can't you be true?
That's how Maybellene was born, a sped-up, electrified version of an old country song called Ida Red. But what Chuck did was something else entirely. He gave it fierce guitar, a voice with attitude, and a story that actually sounded like real youth. The result? An absolute hit, over 1 million copies sold. And most importantly, an African-American artist was breaking into a market dominated by white performers, doing it his way, without copying anyone. Just like that, without asking permission, Chuck Berry had invented rock and roll. But you know how this goes. When you rise too fast, the fall can hit even harder. And Chuck Berry, with all his fame and talent, was no exception. That rebellious personality, the same one that made him unique, also got him into serious trouble. The first, and maybe the biggest, came in 1959. Chuck was arrested for transporting a minor across state lines for immoral purposes. The Mann Act, which was extremely strict at the time, showed no mercy. 5-year sentence. He served 3. And even though he returned to the stage afterward, he was never quite the same. In the years that followed, the problems kept piling up. Tax evasion in the 70s, more time in prison, accusations of voyeurism and marijuana possession in the 80s. All of it started to damage both his image and his music. As if that weren't enough, his former bandmate Johnny Johnson, the same one who gave him his first break, sued him for the rights to more than 50 songs. According to Johnson, they had written them together, but only Berry was credited. And even though he didn't win the case, the controversy stuck. Musically, things weren't great either. The British invasion was in full swing, with bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones taking over everything. Chuck, on the other hand, was starting to lose momentum. He grew colder, more distant. To cut costs, he started touring with local musicians in each city, which lowered the quality of his shows. And just like that, the man who had created the sound of rock suddenly seemed like a ghost of his glory days. But even through all of that, his influence never disappeared. By then, no one could deny that Chuck Berry had changed music forever. His career had ups and downs, but his legacy was so massive, it became impossible to ignore. Artists who are legends today looked at him like a god on stage. John Lennon once said, "If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry." Keith Richards, the soul of the Rolling Stones, considered him his mentor. And it wasn't uncommon for them to play Johnny B. Goode in their shows as a tribute. Even Elvis Presley, the other giant of the genre, drank straight from the Berry fountain. Because Chuck didn't just make catchy songs, he defined the language of rock, both musically and visually. The sound, the attitude, the stage presence, the show, it all came from his mind, his guitar, and his rebellious spirit. In 1986, he was one of the first to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a recognition more than well-deserved. And in 2014, he received the Polar Music Prize, a kind of Nobel for music, confirming that his influence crossed generations, styles, and borders. When he died in 2017 at the age of 90, he left a massive void, but also an eternal legacy. Because every time you hear a riff that makes you want to turn up the volume, every time you see a guitarist sliding across the stage with swagger, that's Chuck. Even if you don't see him, his spirit lives on in every rock band that came after. So yes, let's say it loud and clear. Chuck Berry wasn't just the father of rock and roll, he was its original soul. And if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with this story. If you want to keep discovering more legends like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. The journey through rock history is just getting started.